We'll talk about that.
It's quite poor. Hello and welcome, my name is Ian and this channel is all about music and art, and in this series of videos we've been looking at what is happening regarding the music streaming in the UK. The UK Government's Digital Culture, Media and Sports Committee have been looking into the ways that streaming platforms and large record companies manage payments to songwriters, musicians and performers. And on the 15th of October 2020, Parliament published a news article stating that the Digital Culture, Media and Sports Committee were going to inquire into the impact of the streaming on the future of the music industry. This article stated that the inquiry would consider whether the government should take action to protect the industry from piracy in the wake of steps taken by the EU on copyright and intellectual property rights. Now, I knew that some high-profile musicians and music industry types were going to be giving evidence to the committee. And the first of these meetings was on the 24th of November 2020. And it continued through December into January and February of this year, 2021. Now, these were long meetings lasting over 3 hours. So what I've done is I've edited them all down into shorter videos, and you can find a link to all the previous meeting videos in the description down below. I've also created an introduction for each section, and if you want to, you can skip straight past those bits to the questions by clicking on the timestamps. Again, all of this stuff is in the description. So in this video we'll have a look at the first session from the 10th of February 2021, and I thought it would be worth providing a short background to the witnesses giving evidence in this first session. We have Roberto Neri, who is the chair of the Music Publishers Association, and Geoff Taylor, chief executive of the BPI. Roberto Neri was Executive Vice President for the UK of Downtown Music Publishing and also headed the European business development of its parent company, Downtown Music Holdings. He took up his position at the Music Publishing Association on the 3rd of July 2019. Geoff Taylor is Chief Executive of the BPI, the representative body for the UK record labels, and for the Brits Award Limited, which stages the annual Brits Awards. He joined the BPI as its chief executive in February 2007. All sessions were chaired by Julia Knight, and the complete list of committee members and relevant links are in the description down below. This recording is made in agreement with the UK Parliament's terms and conditions, which state that I cannot alter the video or audio in any way. I can't use the material for satire or use it on a website or social media platform that promotes, encourages and facilitates illegal activity or encourage hatred and antisocial behaviour. So here is part 3 of session 1 from the 10th of February 2021 into the economics of music streaming.
Thank you. Giles Watling.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. First, something that you were talking about, Geoff, when you were talking to Kevin Brennan, and it's just coming to my head, but it occurs to me, we all love the idea of spending on A&R. It means you find new artists, you're out there, and of course, the way you do that these days has changed. You look online, see who's got a following, and the big companies are doing that. But are we spending too much on that kind of thing when struggling artists, good artists with followings, are struggling to pay rent? I mean, is it possible that the big companies are increasing their throughput? They're taking on artists, sucking them dry, and then moving on. Is that perhaps the case?
I don't think so. What we're seeing in the streaming world is that it actually takes longer to break an artist. It's no longer a question of putting an album together, putting it out, and you've broken an artist by getting to a high chart position very quickly. It typically takes years now to develop an artist and get them to the point where they're truly successful. So I don't see labels burning through artists in that way. And the A&R really is the key to the business. As I said before, one of the reasons the UK has been so successful is our relatively very high levels of A&R spend. My ambition is to see that go up, but the only way that labels can risk that extra money every year is if they are getting more in from streaming, because it's the primary now source of revenue which drives the business. So I think all the indicators at the moment are super positive because A&R investment has been rising year on year. royalties paid out to artists have been rising and have risen as a share of label revenues as well. And we've got a super competitive marketplace now where artists, as I think Roberto was saying a few minutes ago, artists can choose the type of deal they want. So they can choose the type of deal which is an assignment of copyright and getting a big advance and lots to spend on marketing, or they can do it themselves or just do a label services deal and keep all the money. So it feels to me like all the pillars that we need to drive a successful market are in place, but we've got to let it grow.
Do you think the dividing of the cake, the spending is about right, and the proportions are about right as we are?
Yes, I think they are. I mean, we're spending 25% of total turnover. That's much higher than most industries spend on their R&D, and I see that as a good thing.
Okay, moving on to online harms. The government said that online harms regime would only cover harm to individuals and not corporations. Now, you both, Geoff and Roberto, you both called on the government to include harm to rights holders in the online safety bill. Why is that?
Because ultimately, the different forms of harm that government's looking at, they all go back to the same place, which is platforms claiming not to be responsible for the content that appears on their service, despite the fact that it's fundamental to their business. And Roberto made a good point about services like YouTube being a music service rather than a platform. So they should be responsible. And I don't think that it is either right to say that consumers don't suffer from illegal services, because I think consumers do suffer, and those are individual harms, but also that individuals working in the creative industries suffer. And the creative industries, contribute 111 billion in GVA to our economy every year. They're one of the fastest growing sectors of the economy. And I think it should be a priority for government, and therefore government should be thinking in the online harms legislation, how can we protect creators?
Right, and that includes the rights holders. I mean,
that includes the rights holders. I think they should actually broaden it to include economic harms more generally. But if not, then they should at the very least create a structure to extend it later to economic harms if the platforms don't take voluntary measures that are sufficient.
Okay, is the way the record industry gets copyright, is the method that it gets copyrights from creatives mean that it will fall outside the regulations of tech companies? And as an add-on to that, what legislation would you like to see?
Well, we certainly think that online harms is not going to do it for us as it currently stands. And as I've said, we were pointed by government in the direction of the CMA's Digital Task Force and its review following on from the Furman review. So given the fact that we were pointed in that direction, we hope the government will now move with alacrity to implement the recommendations of that Digital Task Force, which are all about proactive responsibility of digital services and dealing with things like know your customer. If you've got someone, let's say you're eBay, and you've got a consumer who's continually uploading listings onto eBay of illegal stuff, then you should know who they are. And when they reappear with a new username, you shouldn't allow them back on the platform because you should know who they are. That's the kind of proactive step that every digital service needs to take. Otherwise, they're just handing the keys over to the pirates.
That's a very good analogy, and I hope that the government will be listening when we finally publish our report. Just finally, moving on to YouTube and Twitch differ from SoundCloud, as I understand, as both companies allow users to live stream music. Does live streaming pose a particular problem for rights holders that we haven't yet heard in oral evidence? Do you know what?
I think the pandemic is changing things. Firstly, live streaming was not a huge business for artists in terms of concerts, and obviously, creators and artists have had to get really creative about how they create new live streams as a business model. But at the same time, streaming wasn't illegal. Streaming of live content or illegal streams weren't a huge part of the piracy problem. We have seen that tick up, but particularly what's called stream rippers. So services like YouTube, which aggregate huge amounts of content, don't protect that content properly. And then you have these hostile applications called stream rippers on mobile devices that will just turn a live stream into a download effectively. So you've got that song for free forever. And I think someone mentioned app stores earlier. And the app stores host all these stream ripping apps. They're very difficult to get down in most cases. And we need a whole suite of measures to deal with those. So you need to be able to get blocking orders much more cheaply and easily. to block access to those services. You need to be able to get them out of search rankings. You need to be able to get them off the app stores. Because ultimately, these are just people running businesses to rip off creators and enrich themselves. And government could move a lot faster to deal with all these issues. If it did, it would make the UK the best place to invest in creating content, which would be a huge advantage for us, particularly post-Brexit.
That's great. Thank you for that. Hand back to you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. John Nicholson. John Nicholson.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. Mr. Neri, I wonder if I could return to an interesting revelation from earlier on, which is when you said that you employed a lobbyist for this inquiry. Can I ask you what the lobbyist's brief was?
So that wasn't me.
No, there wasn't. It was Mr. Taylor. My apologies, Mr. Taylor. I'll repeat the question, Mr. Taylor. There was an interesting revelation earlier on when you told one of my colleagues that you employed a lobbyist for this inquiry. Can I ask what the lobbyist's brief was?
Yeah, surely. Simply to help us deal with the huge number of issues that the inquiry raises and advise us both in terms of what do you put into the media, what don't you put into the media in terms of responding to the ongoing debate that's happening out there, particularly on social media. So how should we deal with those issues? And what issues do we need to prepare for questions from yourselves in appearing before the inquiry, suspecting that we might get called to give evidence?
So more media training than lobbying, or lobbying as well as media training?
Well, certainly for me, it's been principally helping to advise me to prepare for this session, acting as you guys, actually doing a grilling session, asking tough questions like this. But also, yes, very much more on the comms side, which is about what messages should we get out to try and articulate our case.
Have the lobbyists contacted individual committee members?
I'm not aware. I don't believe so, but I will ask. I'm happy to ask.
Yeah, because that would be interesting. Who are the lobbyists, out of interest?
I think I was asked that before. It's a small agency. I prefer, just because it will feel to me more appropriate, if I could write to you with that.
I don't understand. Why is it a secret?
It's not really a secret. It's just that I think they might prefer it. But if you insist, I can tell you.
Yeah, please do.
Okay, it's a small company called Fleetwood.
Fleetwood. Expensive?
It's all relative. I wish they weren't as expensive as they are.
How expensive are they?
Oh my goodness. I don't know exactly. Maybe 20,000, 30,000 pounds, something like that.
Just for this inquiry?
Yeah. Well, we've taken them on since the inquiry was announced. It's fair to say.
Fascinating. And are they also lobbying ministers?
I think we do that direct, to be fair. So we have a relationship with ministers ourselves. But that's not really what we need them for. What we need them for is to help us deal with a really complex inquiry. What facts do we need to look up? What messages do we need to get out there?
So as far as you know, the lobbying firm hasn't contacted ministers, just lobbying the press and possibly individual committee members?
Yes, I'm not aware of them having contacted ministers, but again, I would have to check.
And what is the principal message you ask them to get out there for that large amount of money that they're charging you?
Well, to be fair, they helped us to do our own press releases. So it's not so much that they're getting the message out there, they're advising us on our messaging. And you will have seen, we've published a series of press releases about the year-end figures, about the growth of the streaming market. And it's really, there's a lot of data and there are a lot of points to explain around the operation of the streaming market. And that's what we've been trying to do well.
Mr. Neri, perhaps I could just ask you a quick question, because I'm conscious we're running short of time. What's to prevent apps being downloaded that allow the illegal use of music?
What's to prevent them from being available? They shouldn't be available through these app store platforms to begin with.
Yes. What's to prevent that from happening? What's to prevent the illegal downloading and use of them?
We need to have stronger measures in place to not allow these app stores to provide them in the first place. We need more scrutiny, and we need more government intervention when we ask for it.
And specifically, how would that work? What do you want the government to do? And specifically, since all we can do is give recommendations to the government, what would you like to see this committee recommend?
Thank you, Mr. Nicholson. I mean, it's such an important subject. I would love to come back to you and just write specifically about this and all of our asks on this particular subject.
But maybe just give us a headline, the top ask. And by all means, then follow that up.
Yeah. We will definitely follow it up. But just to take down, when we identify and say this app is not licensed and is acting illegally, we want it removed. We would like to be able to enforce it. Currently, we don't have the measures in place.
Okay, thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Heather Wheeler.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to ask, please, some questions about the multi-year global license agreements. And so this is to David Joseph, if David's on the line. What I'm really interested in is those license agreements with Spotify, where you have, in effect, reduced the royalty rates with them. So I'm wondering whether those reductions have also then been passed on to the artists.
If I might, David, I don't think David Joseph is on this session.
Right.
Apologies.
Am I a bit too early, Julian?
No, it's all right. Don't worry, that's fine. It was to Roberto Neri, actually, your question, I believe. To Geoff Taylor. David Joseph was the gentleman from Universal who had a great knowledge of Harry Potter.
He negotiated that. I beg your pardon, Geoff. Geoff or Roberto. Thank you.
I'm afraid it's difficult for me to comment on individual companies' commercial deals. We're a trade body. We don't get to see their commercial deals. The only general point I'd make is that, labels negotiate deals with services and their interests are aligned with their artists. So the label wants to get, as Roberto was saying, wants to get as much money as it can. The more money it gets, the more money it then pays on to its artists in royalties. So it's always trying to maximize its own interests and those of its artists. If it ever agrees a lower rate, that would be because it wants to help the platform grow its size, grow its subscriber numbers, in the belief that that will ultimately benefit everyone. That's probably the best answer I can give, but I can't be more specific, I'm afraid, because we don't get to see those deals.
Right. I think I want to ask my questions to the next panel, actually, Chair, please.
Okay, thank you. Julie Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. Geoff and Roberto, you've both called for increased government intervention against piracy. What do you think the government could do to help prevent piracy? We'll go to Roberto first, then Geoff.
So I think it's fair to say that we need to have clear copyright liability, modern anti-piracy tools available that are modern, and
what?
Tools that can identify. It's clear that some of these services can know everything about your shopping habits, but not yet identify what songs you're uploading, being one example. And we need transparency obligations on the digital services. There's not enough transparency with the data they're providing us. Some particular services.
Thank you. Geoff?
Thank you. I'd say a clear duty of care on platforms to take proactive measures to prevent piracy appearing on their services and remove it when it does. A faster and cheaper system of website blocking, because at the moment you can get court orders to block an illegal site, but it takes months, it costs tens of thousands of pounds to do so. And particularly for smaller creators, not just in music, but like if you're an individual photographer, how can you possibly protect yourself under that system? So faster, cheaper website blocking.
How would they do that? How would they have that faster, cheaper system?
Well, at the moment, you kind of have to go to the High Court. We'd suggest that you could look at possibly an administrative system such as exists in some other countries, or at least reduce the volume of evidence that you're required to provide in order to get a blocking order, simply because it's an access to justice question. It's only really groups like BPI that can bring these cases because they're a huge undertaking to bring, and that means that most of the pirate services are never subject to blocking.
Anything else?
I'd agree that more needs to be done about app stores, because particularly on the Google Play Store, there's no pre-vetting of apps. So any app can go up, and then we have to find them and get them removed. And it's a very time-consuming process and often doesn't work that well. So for example, there are lots of apps that get uploaded for big artists like, I saw one yesterday, Billie Eilish, where it's just an app that contains Billie Eilish's album. Now, how could Google think that that's legal when it's being uploaded by some unheard of tech corporation? They can't. They should have, again, I suppose it comes back to this sort of proactive duty of care, that they should be scanning these things themselves and taking reasonable measures to prevent piracy coming on their platform. At the moment, all of the responsibility is on the creators to both monitor it and get it taken down. And that can't be right, and it's never going to work.
When I was doing a bit of research, a bit of homework for this session today, I came across reports about the departure in 2015 of BPI's former head of piracy, David Wood, who happened to be an ex-police officer. And at the time, BPI said it was due to restructuring, but then later it emerged he'd been sacked for gross misconduct, and BPI took him to bankruptcy court, and the matter was then referred to the police. Has BPI ever recovered any money from that?
We've tried. It was an employee fraud against us, which was a horrible thing when someone you've employed and trusted turns out to have been taking money from you.
You're right.
I'm going to probably have to write to you with the details because it's a few years ago now. But yeah, we did take every action we could, and we got a civil agreement that he would repay certain sums, but then he went bankrupt, etc. So it's been difficult. I believe we've still got some kind of outstanding order against him, and obviously we think he should pay some of that money, all of that money back.
Could you write to the committee with that information? Because I think it would be useful in terms of seeing what's actually happened, especially when it's around this area of piracy that he worked on. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Geoff, you stated that you wanted to see the online harms or online safety bill to include economic harms. This is quite a familiar call now. We're getting this in terms of areas such as, for example, scams and other such things. But I think you sort of recognised as well in your sort of follow-up that is not likely to happen, that it's quite unrealistic to expect that the online harms, online safety bill will be something which is such a catch-all, what I refer to as Christmas tree legislation. Everyone wants to hang something off it. So given that it is unlikely that will happen, that your particular gripes will be addressed, what other levers can be pulled in order to ensure a more equitable system within music streaming?
Firstly, as I say, I think it would be useful to amend that bill if it is not included at the beginning, such that the government has the power to extend the legislation to cover economic harm.
Forgive me, Mr. Taylor, but you can amend the bill all you like. The government has a majority of 80 odd. It won't go through unless the government wishes to do so, and if they're not minded to do it, it won't happen. So let's park the idea of the online harms dealing with all your problems in the same way that many other areas as well are looking for it to do so. It won't do so, almost certainly. So I'll repeat the question again. What levers can be pulled either by government or frankly by the industry in order to ensure that there is a fairer balance within the economics of music streaming?
Then two things which have been touched on earlier, but to clarify. The first is the clarification that safe harbours do not apply to either services which are music services and are using them to negotiate undervalued royalties, or to services which are havens for pirate content. So clarify that the safe harbour does not protect either of those. And then secondly, take forward the recommendations of the Competition and Markets Authority Digital Task Force, that a proactive responsibility should be put on platforms to introduce know your business customer procedures, notice and stay down procedures, use technology to ensure that illegal content is recognised and not allowed onto the platform in the first place. There are a whole myriad of different measures that could be taken pursuant to those recommendations, which I believe government's been looking at the possibility of consumer protection legislation as a vehicle for that. Whatever the vehicle is, it needs to adequately protect creators and those who invest in them.
So that's quite interesting. I mean, the first part of that, in terms of safe harbours, that would require legislation in order to do so. And your idea was basically that it would be tacked on to online harms as such. Let's look at the second part then, the more realistic one, if you like, in at least the short to medium term, which is to do with the CMA and the Digital Task Force, the Digital Markets Authority. In that respect, then, you would like to see them come at this from a competition angle. Then, do you think it's to do with? Do you think there should be a wider investigation into the industry in order to see exactly in terms of things like integration and whether or not there is fair value for musicians, for songwriters, in terms of music streaming and in terms of, as Mr. Neri said, YouTube, which is the largest music streaming website in the world in many respects?
I refer to the Competition and Markets Authority because it was entrusted with setting up a digital music task force looking at the role of platforms and the structures of the market for platforms. I think that the issue is more from a sort of consumer protection angle that the digital task force is looking at it. And certainly there, the types of online harm that we're talking about, economic harm to creators, I think could be addressed through that. But I think that the streaming market overall shows signs of healthy competition. Spoken generally, I think that the safe harbour is a distortion to that usual process of competition. But if one eliminates the safe harbour, you see Apple Music, Spotify, Tidal, all the other streaming services, Amazon Music, competing incredibly hard to have the best service, attract the best users. You see labels competing intensely to sign the best artists and to get the best deals with those services. So from where I sit, it's a highly competitive sector, the music streaming sector.
Yes,
we just need to get rid of the distortions.
Yeah, we accept the fact that you believe it to be a highly competitive sector, and probably in isolation it is. But when you throw YouTube into the mix, then it becomes less so, it becomes more distended. And that is the purpose of, do you believe that in terms of the Digital Music Task Force and in terms of the CMA, whether or not it needs to look at that relationship?
I think it certainly could. It seemed to me that the CMA was more, when it was looking at piracy as only one subset of a much broader set of issues. I think the CMA could potentially be a means to address the safe harbour point and to clarify that if you are hosting content, then you can't hide behind a safe harbour either to reduce the value of the rights that you acquire or to claim that you're not responsible for illegal content that appears on your service. So, yeah, I think the CMA route is worth examining for both points, both the safe harbours point and the kind of piracy responsibility issue.
And they would come at that, just to drill down just further in terms of the safe harbour. I'd have thought that would need separate legislation. How is that effectively a competition matter rather than one about copyright?
I think it has competition effects because, as we touched on quite a lot earlier, the fact that YouTube is able to acquire rights so cheaply because of safe harbors means that it kind of has a competitive advantage over the other services. It's not paying out as much in costs as the other services for the music that it's using. And it has the effect of both suppressing demand for subscription to the other services, and it has the effect of constraining price. So for those reasons, I think I see the safe harbour as a major distortion to the competitive landscape.
Okay, thank you. That's really interesting. Thank you very much for your evidence today, Mr. Geoff Taylor and also Roberto Neri. That brings our first panel to an end. We're going to take a 2-minute recess as we set up our second panel. Order, order.
So thanks for watching. In the next video we'll start to cover session 2 from the 10th of February 2021 and that which will be available in the next few days. The witnesses for that meeting were Graham Davis, Chief Executive of the Ivers Academy, and Horace Tunbridge, General Secretary at the Musicians Union. So thanks very much. Take care. See you next time. Bye bye.